I often find myself reflecting on how my life took such a drastic turn. It's a story I've shared with few, but it's my story, one marked by abandonment, heartache, and a quest for identity. My name is Grace Thompson, and this is how my journey began. I was 10 years old when everything changed. My father, Robert Thompson, had lost his job as an auto mechanic, and with it, our family's financial stability crumbled. My mother, Linda, worked part-time as a cashier, but her income wasn't enough to cover our needs. The mounting bills and debts soon became too much for us to handle. I remember those days vividly. My parents were tense and distant, and the arguments were frequent and harsh. One day, without much warning, my parents told me that I would be going to live with my grandparents in Nebraska. "It's just for a while," my mother assured me. "Things will get better, and we'll have you back with us soon." I wanted to believe them. I really did. I packed a few belongings and left our small, cramped apartment with a mixture of hope and confusion. I wasn't sure why things had gotten so bad, but I clung to the promise that it would be temporary. When I arrived at my grandparents' small farm in rural Nebraska, the reality of my situation hit me hard. The farm was miles from the nearest town, isolated and quiet. My grandparents, in their 70s, greeted me with a forced cheerfulness that felt hollow. They were good people, but they were old and set in their ways. They tried to make me feel welcome, but their warmth did little to ease the coldness I felt inside. The months turned into years. Each day was a reminder of my parents' broken promise. I sent letters and tried calling, but my attempts were met with silence. The only response I ever received was a vague postcard now and then, saying that things were still tough and that they were working on it. The hardest part was feeling abandoned. My grandparents were kind enough, but their support was limited. They were busy with their daily routines and the demands of the farm. I felt like an afterthought, a burden they were forced to bear. They didn't know how to comfort me, and I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. The pain of being left behind festered in me, and I grew increasingly withdrawn. My loneliness grew deeper when I learned that my younger brother, Max, had been born after I left. I was told he was a bright, cheerful child who brought joy to my parents' lives. The news only deepened my sense of betrayal. Here was this new part of my family, growing up with my parents, while I was left alone, far away. Then came a turning point that shattered my remaining illusions. I was about 15 when I overheard a conversation between my grandmother and my mother on the phone. I had been trying to eavesdrop to catch any news from my parents, and what I heard made my heart sink. My mother was still alive, and she had been in contact with my grandmother all along. The realization was a gut punch. My parents hadn't been completely out of reach. They had chosen to keep me at a distance. That discovery was the catalyst for my decision to confront my past. I was determined to find out why my parents had abandoned me and why they hadn't tried to reconnect. But my search for answers was met with obstacles. My grandparents were tight-lipped, and any questions I asked only resulted in vague responses or more silence. When I turned 13, my Aunt Helen came into the picture. She was my father's younger sister, and she lived in Denver, Colorado. I didn't know her well, but my grandparents decided that it was time for a change. I was sent to live with Aunt Helen, and though I was apprehensive, I hoped that this new chapter would bring some relief. Leaving Nebraska was both an escape and a new beginning. Aunt Helen met me at the bus station with a warm smile and open arms. She was kind, patient, and seemed genuinely interested in helping me rebuild my life. Despite my fears and reservations, I felt a glimmer of hope. The isolation of the farm, the endless waiting, and the pain of abandonment were behind me. At least, that's what I hoped. My life with Aunt Helen was a stark contrast to my time with my grandparents. She gave me the space to heal, to start over, and to envision a future for myself. It was clear from the start that she wanted to help me, and she showed me a level of care and understanding that I hadn't experienced in years. This new phase of my life was the beginning of a journey toward finding myself and understanding my place in the world. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Aunt Helen's presence marked the first real step toward healing from the wounds of my past. I wish I could say that moving to Denver with Aunt Helen solved all my problems, but life is rarely that simple. While it offered me a fresh start, the pain of my past and the longing for answers followed me, shadowing every step I took. Aunt Helen was wonderful. She made sure I felt welcome and cared for. Her home was a stark contrast to my grandparents' farm, bright, bustling, and filled with opportunities. Helen was a high school teacher, and her nurturing nature extended beyond the classroom. She listened to me, encouraged me, and became my emotional anchor. Her support was exactly what I needed as I navigated the tumultuous teenage years. I started high school in Denver, and while I struggled with the emotional scars from my past, I began to find solace in my studies. It was during this time that I discovered my passion for dentistry. The idea of helping people, of being able to make a difference in someone's life, resonated deeply with me. Aunt Helen encouraged me to pursue this path, and it gave me a sense of purpose. Despite my growing interest in dentistry, the absence of my biological parents loomed over me. My parents' silence was a constant reminder of the abandonment I had endured. Every birthday, every holiday spent without them, was a painful reminder of the family I had lost. When I turned 18, I made the decision to legally change my last name to Thompson-Hart, adopting Aunt Helen's last name. It felt like a necessary step to sever the painful ties to my biological family and to fully embrace the new life I was building. Aunt Helen was supportive of this decision, and it gave me a sense of closure. I was ready to move forward, focusing on my education and career aspirations. It was during my sophomore year in dental school that I overheard a conversation between Aunt Helen and my grandmother. I had been visiting my aunt's home during a break from school, and I was curious about a phone call Aunt Helen had taken in the kitchen. I had a bad habit of eavesdropping, but I was desperate for any information about my parents. From where I stood, I could hear Aunt Helen speaking softly to my grandmother. "You know, Grace overheard that conversation," Aunt Helen said, her voice tinged with concern. "She's still hurt by everything. I don't know how to explain this to her." The grandmother's voice, though distant, was unmistakably my mother's. My heart pounded as I strained to hear more. "I know, Helen," my mother said, "but we didn't want to upset her. We thought it was better this way." The revelation was staggering. My mother was alive. All those years of believing she had vanished were shattered by the realization that she had been in contact with my grandmother. The betrayal cut deep. If she was still in touch, why hadn't she tried to reach out to me? Why had she allowed me to believe she was gone? My emotions were a whirlwind. I felt anger, confusion, and an overwhelming need for answers. That night, I confronted Aunt Helen. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did my mother let me believe she was dead? I need to understand what happened." Aunt Helen took a deep breath and looked at me with a mix of sympathy and sadness. "Grace, I didn't want to hurt you further. Your mother and father made some choices that were beyond my control. They felt that leaving you behind was the only way they could manage their situation. They thought it would be temporary, but things didn't go as planned." Her words did little to soothe the storm inside me. I felt as if my world had been turned upside down once again. I needed to know more, to confront my parents and hear their side of the story. But Aunt Helen's words also made me realize that finding answers might not be as straightforward as I had hoped. In the months that followed, I continued to focus on my studies, using them as a distraction from the turmoil within. I knew I had to confront my past, but the process was slow and fraught with uncertainty. The pain of being abandoned, the confusion of my parents' reappearance, and the quest for my own identity were all part of the tangled web I had to navigate. Though my heart was heavy with unanswered questions, Aunt Helen remained a steady source of support. She guided me through the emotional turbulence, helping me focus on my future. But the unresolved issues with my parents loomed large, casting a long shadow over my journey. The day I had dreaded for years finally arrived. It was a chilly morning in early autumn when my estranged family reappeared in my life, right when I was settling into my routine at the dental clinic. Denver's crisp air seemed to mirror the cold reality I was about to face. It started with a letter. I was sitting in my small apartment, going over patient records when I noticed an envelope with my parents' return address. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, the contents sending a chill down my spine. The letter demanded that I provide financial support for them and my younger brother, Max, now 6 years old. They threatened legal action if I refused. The words on the paper seemed to mock the years of silence and the pain I had endured. I stared at the letter, a mixture of disbelief and anger swirling within me. How could they have the audacity to demand anything from me after all these years? After everything they had done, they had the nerve to come back into my life and expect me to help them? The betrayal was unbearable. I took the letter to Aunt Helen, feeling a surge of frustration and confusion. We sat at the kitchen table, the room feeling unusually cold despite the warm autumn sunlight streaming through the window. Aunt Helen's face was a mask of concern as she read the letter. "Oh, Grace," she said softly, handing the letter back to me. "This is awful. I'm so sorry you have to go through this." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. They just waltz back into my life and think they can demand money? What gives them the right? They abandoned me. They left me to fend for myself. And now they want something from me? Aunt Helen nodded sympathetically. "I know it's hard, but you need to be careful. They might try to use the situation to manipulate you. You should consider seeking legal advice." Taking her advice to heart, I consulted with a lawyer. The legal process was daunting, but I was determined to fight back. My lawyer assured me that I had no legal obligation to provide financial support, and if they pursued legal action, we could counter with claims of their abandonment and neglect. I felt a small measure of relief knowing that I had some legal ground to stand on. But the legal battle was only part of the ordeal. My parents' reappearance triggered a wave of emotional turmoil. I was grappling with feelings of betrayal and anger. My parents, Robert and Linda, had seemingly forgotten the years of pain they had caused, and their sudden intrusion into my life was like a cruel joke. One evening, as I was leaving the clinic, I encountered Emily Foster, my sister-in-law. Her presence was unexpected and unwelcome. She had always been known for her childish behavior, but this time, her demeanor was particularly aggressive. "Grace, you're making a big mistake," Emily said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're letting your bitterness drive you away from your family. They need your help, and you're being selfish." Her words were like a slap in the face. I was taken aback by her audacity. Selfish? After everything they've done to me? You have no idea what it's been like. I'm not going to let them use me again. Emily's face twisted in anger. "You don't understand. They're struggling, and you're just going to turn your back on them?" I tried to remain calm, but the encounter left me shaken. Emily's interference was just another complication in an already complex situation. The emotional strain was growing heavier with each passing day. Determined to regain control, I focused on preparing my response to the legal threat from my parents. I gathered all the documents and evidence of their abandonment, making sure to present a clear case. The process was exhausting, but it was necessary to protect myself from their demands. As I navigated the legal challenges, Aunt Helen was my rock. She provided a comforting presence, offering encouragement and practical support. We spent countless hours reviewing documents and strategizing our next steps. The legal confrontation, however, was only the beginning of a long and grueling process. My parents' attempts to pressure me continued, and the emotional scars of abandonment resurfaced. I was forced to confront the reality that my past was not something I could easily escape. Despite the turmoil, I remained resolute. I refused to let my parents' demands control my life. I continued to focus on my career and my well-being, determined to emerge from this ordeal stronger and more independent. The fight for my own sense of closure and justice was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The process of healing and self-discovery was ongoing, and as I moved forward, I hoped to find peace and reclaim my sense of identity from the shadows of my past. As the final days of the legal proceedings approached, the weight of my past seemed almost unbearable. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the constant turmoil, but I was also determined to close this chapter of my life on my own terms. Denver was bustling around me, but my world felt like it had come to a standstill. The confrontation in court was intense. My parents' demands had been clear. They wanted financial support and were threatening legal action if I didn't comply. But my lawyer and I were prepared. We presented a compelling case, backed by the documents and evidence of their abandonment. It was clear to the court that their sudden reappearance was not a genuine attempt to reconnect, but rather a calculated move to gain financial support. In the courtroom, I faced them for the first time in years. My father, Robert, looked older and more defeated than I remembered, while my mother, Linda, had a resigned expression. The sight of them was unsettling. It brought back all the pain and confusion of my childhood. But this time, I was not the vulnerable little girl who had been left behind. I was an adult, a professional, and I had the strength to stand up for myself. The judge's ruling was a significant victory. I was legally absolved of any financial obligation to my parents. Their attempts to manipulate and control me through the threat of legal action had failed. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a profound sense of relief and liberation. The chapter was finally closing, and I could start focusing on my future. However, the resolution of the legal battle didn't completely erase the emotional scars. The process had dredged up old feelings of abandonment and rejection, and it took time to heal. I found solace in the support of Aunt Helen, whose unwavering love and encouragement had been my anchor throughout this turbulent period. One of the most difficult parts of moving on was dealing with Emily Foster, my sister-in-law. Her attempt to sabotage my life had reached a peak during a baby shower that was meant to be a celebration. She had caused a scene, making false accusations that led to a rift in the family. The fallout was messy, and it strained my relationship with the rest of the family. But even in the midst of this drama, Aunt Helen stood by me. She helped me navigate the situation, offering both emotional and practical support. We decided it was best to cut ties with Emily and distance ourselves from the chaos she created. It was a hard decision, but it was necessary for my own well-being. With the turmoil behind me, I began focusing on my life and my career. The dental clinic in Denver was my sanctuary. I poured my energy into my work, finding satisfaction and purpose in helping my patients. It was a stark contrast to the pain of the past, and it offered me a sense of normalcy and fulfillment. Gradually, I began to rebuild my life. The emotional wounds from my past were healing, and I started to embrace a future where I could focus on my career and personal happiness. The support of Aunt Helen was a constant reminder that I was not alone. Her love had become my foundation, and I cherished the bond we had formed. I also began to understand the importance of self-worth and independence. The ordeal with my family had taught me valuable lessons about resilience and the strength it takes to stand up for oneself. I had learned to trust my instincts and make decisions that were in my best interest. As I looked toward the future, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been arduous, but it had led me to a place of self-discovery and growth. I was no longer defined by my past or the mistakes of my family. I was forging my own path, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. In the end, the story of my life was one of overcoming adversity and finding strength in the face of betrayal. My quest for identity and belonging had led me to a place of self-acceptance and independence. The trials of the past had shaped me, but they no longer held me captive. I was ready to embrace the future, with the knowledge that I had the power to shape my own destiny.